As we approach the 4th of July and celebrate with our families and towns, it is important to recognize what makes a community not only successful, but also what makes it thrive. Many of us belong to multiple communities: Nashua, Hudson, this church, your child's school. Maybe, like me, you belong to a Lindy Hop community or an arts and crafts community. Of the successful communities I've belonged to, individuals have been celebrated, welcomed for their new breadth of knowledge they now bring to the group at large. Each person is seen as an asset with their unique qualities. Newcomers are celebrated, welcomed, and fully included. Over the years, I've come to understand how important a feeling of belonging is to every single person. I've seen so many people blossom into their best selves when they feel they truly belong. I grew up in rural Kansas, where our community was everything. We had our little farming town, and then we had miles and miles of farmland until we reached the next town. We had only one middle school and one high school, and those were the public schools in town. Everyone would turn out for the basketball or football games. Even if you weren't the sporty type, hello, me, you would still show up and cheer on the town's team. In McPherson, just before the end of every school year, we had a parade down Main Street. The whole town turned out and lined the streets, and the entire community observed the holiday of All Schools Day. Each year, the parade was timed with the arrival of the town carnival. This parade was special. This parade was celebrated our county schools. Each school was represented and asked to design a float. Kids were asked to ride alongside or ride on the float or walk alongside with their school. The whole county got to show off their marching bands. Girl Scout and Boy Scout troops were represented. It was a big deal to be involved. At many points throughout their lives, every single child in McPherson County was included in the All Schools Day parade. To this day, many of my friends who have since moved away often time their trip home to coincide with All Schools Day. It was a way for the whole town to show its support for our children. In the middle of my 8th grade year, we moved our family from a small world of McPherson, Kansas, to Rochester, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. Imagine how shocked I was when, at the end of the school year, the calendar dates were ticking by. I was confused. I asked my parents, "When is All Schools Day this year?" I was shocked to learn that this was a made-up holiday and only celebrated in McPherson, Kansas. I found other communities to belong to in Michigan. I joined the ski racing team. I did competition ballroom dance, and that was where I learned Lindy Hop swing dancing. I was exposed to a more diverse group of friends, which allowed me to learn about other cultures and their communities. I traveled. I was fortunate enough to spend a summer living with a host family in Berlin, Germany. At the age of 15, I was taking a subway in Berlin alone to visit museums and stand before the gates of Babylon, all before cell phones. These were experiences that broadened and changed my life in so many ways. My view of community had outgrown the confinement of my small hometown in McPherson, Kansas. My view of community now encompassed the world. We moved back to Kansas prior to my senior year of high school. Community seemed somewhat small. I now felt like an outsider to a community which I once called my own. In Michigan, I was on the varsity ski team. Well, there weren't many opportunities to downhill ski in McPherson, Kansas. And I couldn't play basketball to save my life. I was often forgotten or excluded because I was not seen as athletic. I began to see what happens when a community is unable to accept change and bend. I was old enough to recognize that some of this had always been there, but it was just hidden beneath the surface. My senior year of high school was marked by September 11th, and all of a sudden, who was viewed as inside the community and who was viewed as outside the community was taken to new heights. I watched this injustice happening. and I felt it in my core. I vowed to actively fight whenever I saw it. One evening, I was at high school gathering, and I was arguing for a woman's right to choose. A lit cigarette was thrown into my hair. Fortunately, I don't wear hair products, and only a couple of strands were burned. But it reminded me that this was not where I felt I belonged. I went off to college feeling very uncomfortable and unwilling to exclude people from my version of community. I struggled trying to associate what I had experienced and learned of the great wide world with what I was supposed to accept and reject according to other people's standards. It just didn't match up, and I felt alone. I felt a little lost. I left a college class one day because I refused to accept a professor saying that gay marriage should just not be called marriage and should be called something else. I reminded him that separate was not equal before I walked out of class that day. My college campus was only 30 minutes from the home of Fred Phelps and the Westboro Baptist Church. They regularly held protests at events on campus claiming God hates, God hates. I would yell back, my God is love. It was a very lonely time. I knew others believed what I felt, but they were somewhat elusive in Kansas. The University of Kansas was the liberal university in the state. My scholarship hall, my dorm, had many who held a more accepting view of the world, but I was still looking for some deeper connection. I wanted to belong to a faith, but I wanted my faith to represent my beliefs. My friend and I decided to go church shopping, and that was how I found a UU fellowship on the outskirts of Lawrence, Kansas. Through UU, I learned that a faith community can evolve as society demands. I was proud to have found a faith that allowed me to feel like I truly belonged. I was no longer alone, and there were others who were as inclusive and accepting as I was. I now had a faith that I could wholeheartedly follow. It was my safety net, and that sense of belonging guided and supported me through many difficult times and difficult decisions. That is still how I view community. I view it like the thread of a flag or a quilt. It is there to support and hold everything together when one part gets stressed or pulled. Various communities can overlap, they can twist and turn throughout our lives. Sometimes we stop being a member of one community, only to pick up in another. But the underlying thread of support and belonging is there. That, to me, is what a faith community should be. Flexible, giving, accepting, but constant. I always knew I wanted to run for office sometime in the future. I always had been active politically, volunteering or protesting when necessary, but I was extremely hesitant to run for state representative. I was concerned about how I'd be able to fit it all in and still be able to work. Then there was the leak from the Supreme Court stating that they were reconsidering Roe. I thought about all the women in this state. I thought about my boyfriend's, at that time, 15-year-old daughter. What kind of world did I want her to live in? I knew if the federal protection failed, it would come down to who we had in the State House. I held my vow to actively fight the injustice I was seeing, and I filed as a candidate. Maybe a month later, the Dobbs decision was released and Roe fell. I was learning about it as an American on vacation, sitting in a cafe in Zurich. It all felt so surreal. I had left my country with more federally protected rights than what I was returning to. Everyone else was going about their day, sitting in a cafe, maybe remarking on what had just happened in America, but this was affecting my country. I looked at my boyfriend's daughter, and tears welled in my eyes. I was scared. Once again, I started to feel a bit alone in the world. It was then, when I returned, that I chose to come back to UU Nashua. I knew I'd need my community behind me, encouraging me to keep fighting. I knew I'd need people to turn to if things were difficult. I knew I'd need people who accepted me wholeheartedly and who allowed me to run a campaign which other faiths might criticize. I needed people to fight for. This support allowed me to be my authentic and sometimes incredibly awkward self at every door I knocked. I was able to run a campaign which focused on some difficult topics for folks. I ran on preserving reproductive freedom, building inclusive and welcoming communities, and strengthening our public schools. Because I belong to the UU community, I could honestly say that the right to choose should be between the patient and their doctor without needing to fear going against my church's views. I was actively able to support LGBTQ+ rights. Whether actively or passively, whether you knew it or not, you all were there. I ran a campaign that focused on community. I never knew whose door I would be knocking next. Would they be friendly? Would they yell at me? In the back of my mind, I was guided by my faith. Every conversation was approached with an open mind, open heart, and everyone held inherent worth and dignity. Difficult conversations were approached with love and curiosity. Those conversations mattered. I still carry them with me. They still matter. In Concord, it is much the same. This year, we stopped a fetal heartbeat bill in the House. It would have banned abortions when a heartbeat was detected. We stopped several pieces of anti-LGBTQ legislation. Some of these were by a margin of only 1 to 2 votes, which makes me thankful I decided to run. If you are someone who typically prefers to not pay attention to politics, please first recognize the privilege of that statement. But I also urge that you now take the time to start paying attention. Vote, volunteer, run for office. Any way you can, please get involved. Our faith calls us to put love into action, and I wanted to leave you with a video clip and a story. Candidates are told and advised that at some point they will stop and question why they are doing this. They'll be tired, they will begin to feel like no one wants to listen to them, and that is when they need to remember why they decided to run. You'd get door after door after door where no one wanted to talk or didn't answer. I never felt too dejected, but it was about 2 weeks prior to Election Day last year when I started feeling worried. Could I actually get elected? Did I do everything I needed to? Did anyone care? Was I doing the right thing by running? I accepted leading this service specifically to say thank you for that Sunday in late October, the day I was questioning. I came in just like I always do, and this video was played, narrated by the children in this congregation. It was exactly what I needed to hear, when I needed to hear it. It reminded me that I was running to make a better life for them, and I wished I'd brought tissues that day. So thank you, UU Nashua. Thank you for being my community, and I wish you a happy and safe 4th of July.